Welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use with me, Dr. Marie Haynes. It's been 3 weeks since my last podcast episode, so I'm really excited to get this information to you. I've been traveling, which there's a running joke that whenever I travel, Google tends to do a big update. I don't think there was a massive update. There was a little one while I was gone, but there goes our theory that Google is basing all of their updates on my travel schedule. I don't think I ever fully believed that to begin with. But I was at Pubcon Vegas and also SearchLove in London. It was my first time at London SearchLove, and it was fantastic. Pubcon was really good as well. Pubcon, I had my entire team with me, so we had 8 of us. We had a really good time exploring Vegas, seeing the Strip. Had a great time on Fremont Street. Just Vegas is quite different than Ottawa, where we live. So it was a blast. In this podcast episode, I'm going to share with you a bunch of things that we learned at Pubcon and also SearchLove. I'm going to go over some Google announcements that I didn't cover because I haven't been doing podcast episodes for the last couple of weeks. And also, I'm going to go into great detail about Gary Illyes' Q&A with Jennifer Slegg at Pubcon. This was one of the best Google Q&As that I've been in. We wrote a big blog post about it on our website, which is pretty easy to find. If you just search for Q&A with Gary Illyes, you'll see it there. And we've given everything that Gary said in as close as we can to being verbatim, and then also our thoughts on that. And I'm going to expand on some of those thoughts in this podcast episode. So hopefully you'll get some information from that is able to help you. So let's start off with some Google announcements that you may or may not be aware of. The first thing is that Google has updated some information on their user agent string. This is going to sound kind of complicated to most people. So what we really need to know here is that when you see Googlebot crawling your site, you should now see which Chrome version Googlebot is using. So for quite a long time, Googlebot was stuck on an old version of Chrome, and it's almost evergreen now. As a new version of Chrome comes out, then Googlebot is up to date with that. And that's important for sites that are relying on new technologies. If you use JavaScript framework that is, just a little bit out there, and maybe Google has had trouble crawling some of your JavaScript in the past, the new Googlebot, now that it's evergreen, really should be able to do that. So I'm going to read from Google's blog post on this about the new Evergreen Googlebot and its user agent. It says, in December, we will start periodically updating the above user agent strings to reflect the version of Chrome used in Googlebot. For example, instead of seeing, it used to be, w.x.y.z, you'll see something similar to 76.0.3809.100. This is the version number of the version of Chrome that Googlebot is crawling with. So for those of you who are kind of on the cutting edge in terms of using fancy things on your website, this is something really to pay attention to. Most of us, this really shouldn't matter. Google actually says in their blog post that this change should not affect most websites unless you're looking for a very specific user agent. Some common issues that Google saw when evaluating this change. Number 1, pages that present an error message instead of normal page contents. For example, a page may assume Googlebot is a user with an ad blocker and accidentally prevent it from accessing page contents. And then another is pages that are redirected to a roboted or a no-index document. I know this all is a kind of confusing way to start off podcast, and I think it's important for some of you. For most of our websites, though, we really don't need to worry about this change. A new thing that Google launched as well is a new change of address tool in new Search Console. We've had this in old Search Console, but they've changed the interface somewhat, and they're actually trying to walk sites through a site change. So if you have changed your site in terms of you've migrated to a new domain, something like that, then Google in Search Console should be walking you through this now. They have some very specific advice on when not not to use the change of address tool. And I'm going to go through these because a lot of sites, I see sites that do this. One is if you change from HTTP to HTTPS. This is technically a site move, but it's not something that most sites really need to, any site really needs to use the change of address tool for. Google will figure that out. Similarly, if you're moving pages from one location in your site to another location, like a new directory, that's not a change of address. If you're moving from www to non-www, that's similar to the HTTPS change. And if you're making changes, your URL stays the same, but maybe you're using a new host or a new CDN, that's not a change of address either. So I'm looking forward to actually playing around with the change of address tool, but I do see a lot of people use it when they really shouldn't be using it. Let's talk about algorithm updates. So I mentioned in the intro that Google often updates while I'm traveling, and I think this is just more irony than anything else. And so this last stint of travel that I had, there was some type of an update, I'd say, between October 14th to October 19th. There was a little bit of a blip seen in some of the algo checker tools like Mozcast, things like that. Barry Schwartz had an article about it, that some people are seeing changes. When we looked at our own client data, we have a number of clients mostly up, although some are down, with very, very slight changes around October 14th. But there really wasn't anything significant enough for us to say, ooh, this is a crazy big algorithm update. I think personally that what Google is doing is just making some tweaks to how they assess quality. And, so if your site was affected by the September 24th core update, which was the last big core update we've had, there's a good chance you've seen a different change in traffic in mid-October as well. I did see some Black Hat SEOs tweeting about some significant changes in their sites. One that I follow on Twitter commented that they're seeing a number of PBN sites actually ranking really well in their SERPs. I haven't experienced that personally, so I'm not here to say let's all go create some PBNs and start ranking well. Google will get on top of that. And I think if you are using private blog networks to create links in order to convince Google that your website is, the best of its kind, then you're treading on thin ice. I know there are people who still get away with it. I tweeted something this morning about how Google's getting better and better at finding paid links and or PBNs. And Charles Float, he won't mind me saying this, he replied to me saying, "Laughs in links." And that's cool. If you are into black hat stuff, most of it is not illegal. It's not immoral. Most of the stuff that people are doing, creating links with PBNs, but it's also not recommended because, a penalty can devastate your website. And once you get a penalty, it's very challenging to know, if you've been dabbling in many different linking types of tactics, it's going to be hard to know which one Google's onto. And so I would not recommend using PBNs unless you're trying to experiment with a site that you could just lose at any minute. And move on from that. I suppose there are some of you who want to do that. So we're going to keep an eye on algorithm updates for you over the next while. I want to pay more attention to this October 14th to 19th-ish update over the next couple of weeks or so to see if maybe it's something bigger than we thought. But stay tuned. We'll see what happens. It's been a little while. It's been like a month now since we've had a big core update, so things could be coming. Historically, the fall is when Google does a lot of updates. We've seen a lot of link-related updates in October in the past, and so it wouldn't surprise me if what we just saw was related to links. I think we need to do a bit more investigation, though, before we can say that conclusively. Google tweeted that they had another brief indexing issue at Google this past week. October 16th, they had some slight delays in indexing fresh content. And then they tweeted at 8:24 p.m. Eastern Time on October 16th that this had had been fixed. So if your traffic was down on October 16th and it only lasted for one day, and your site relies on fresh content, so maybe you're a news site, then there's a good chance that this was an issue on Google's side, and that should be fixed by now. It was an interesting thing that Gary Illyes said in Pubcon was that in April of this year, or was it last year? I think it was this year, Google lost a huge chunk of their index. And that was, remember we had these issues with Google not indexing new content. And there was actually, it sounded like a perfect storm of a number of things that went wrong at Google, and they actually lost a huge chunk of the index, which is kind of scary. Looks like they've recovered all that now. And I don't think this most recent indexing snafu is something that's going to cause major issues to any sites, but we'll see. It's possible. Google Assistant, there is new structured data that you can add to specifically appear on Google Assistant. And as people get more and more involved in relying on voice search, this is going to be important. Right now, I still feel like most of the voice searches I do are either, hey, G, what is this? This is our code in our house when we don't want to say the G word, because otherwise it'll wake up all our Google Homes. Hey, G, what song is this? Or who sings the song that goes blah, blah, blah. And, Google's pretty good at that. But they're going to be getting better at actually coming up with answers for things. And so if you have, there's a list we've put in newsletter of certain types of content that can be marked up with schema to appear potentially in Google Assistant. And these include podcasts, recipes, news, how-to guides, and also FAQs. I have not personally experimented with this, but it is something that I do want to do in the future. And I do think we should not be ignoring Google Assistant and also voice. It's the way that Google wants to go, and a lot of people are probably going to be searching for more voice content as Google gets better and better at surfacing good answers for people. Here's an interesting tip from Pubcon. A couple of my team went to a talk with, it was Eric Enge and also Bill Hunt, gave a really, really good talk. They were talking a lot about featured snippets, and they've put together a little bit of information from this talk on Bill and Eric's thoughts on the current status of featured snippets. And I say the current status because what we used to teach for featured snippets, a year ago, or I think 2 years ago, 2+ years ago, maybe even 3, was when my very first long episode of my newsletter talks about winning featured snippets. And some of these things are true in there, but the algorithm has really evolved since then. So what Bill and Eric found are that the most dominant type of pages that you're going to see in a featured snippet are informational pages. It was really interesting because at Pubcon, somebody from Bing actually mentioned that they do not want to include transactional content in featured snippets. I don't know if Bing actually calls them featured snippets, but those answer boxes that Bing provides, they don't want to include any transactional content. Now, we feel like we've seen transactional content in Google featured snippets, but I am betting that they don't want to do that. And what I mean by transactional content is, something that says, if you're trying to answer the question, what is X? And your answer that's in the featured snippet says, you can buy X at our company, along with a call to action, then you're probably not likely to win a featured snippet if this is what Google is pulling from your page. The thing I find most interesting about that, though, is that Google and Bing can very easily determine whether a page is transactional. And we're going to be paying closer attention to this because we really feel like this is a factor in some of the medical sites that have seen drops with core algorithm updates. If Google can determine that you're talking on a medical topic and also you're selling this product that is potentially controversial, maybe you should not be completely trusted unless you're an extremely authoritative brand already. So something to keep in mind. Going back to featured snippets, content in paragraph form tends to do the best. We see featured snippets that are lists and tables, and our general advice is if Google is currently presenting a list in a featured snippet that you want to win, it makes sense to put your content in the form of a list. But you can play around with trying to use paragraphs as well. Featured snippets are mostly awarded to sites with a domain authority of 70 or higher. So a little caveat here, whenever we talk about domain authority, that is a Moz metric, where Moz is trying to do the best they can to replicate PageRank. Google does not use domain authority from Moz. They have their whole own system, but both of them rely heavily on links. And so a site that has a DA 70 is usually an authoritative site. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't win a featured snippet if you have less domain authority than 70. But if the site that currently is winning the featured snippet is a highly authoritative website, it may be challenging for you to steal it back from them. We have several featured snippets for mariehaynes.com, and I'm positive I haven't looked at my DA in a long time, but we're nowhere near 70, I'm sure. So don't let that scare you off, unless the featured snippet scene is currently being dominated by massive authorities. Most of you have heard me give this tip before, but if you want to see if you're next in line for a featured snippet, then let's say that CNN.com currently wins this snippet for whatever keyword you're trying to rank for. Put that keyword into Google minus site:/CNN.com, and now you'll see who would be next to get the featured snippet. And you can experiment by looking at what they do that's different than CNN or different than on your site. So that's a cool little tip. Another thing, too, that came out of Pubcon was that Google said that they optimize your snippets for clicks. Now, this caused some controversy when I tweeted this. What Gary Illyes said was that when Google is trying to figure out what to use as your description in the snippet. So most of us look at that as a meta description. And if you write in the meta description, there's a good chance that that's what people are going to see in the Google results under your URL. They'll see your meta description. If Google rewrites your meta description, it's because they actually feel that this is better for enticing people to click. And what they'll do is, let's say my search is about a particular thing that's on your page, but maybe it's like 6 paragraphs down. Google might extract information from that paragraph to show in the snippet to make it basically to say, hey, this page has got the information you're looking for. So, if Google is rewriting your snippets, then there could be reason for that. And I think we should all be paying attention to that. Let's move on to some other tips from Pubcon. I did a link building day with Ann Smarty and also Dixon Jones, and it was really good. We brainstormed on a number of things for people in the room to say, here's how you could generate some links for your website, and links that Google would be likely to pay attention to, as opposed to just, let's go everywhere and get as many links as we can. Ann had an interesting point where she said that, I'll read it from our newsletter here. According to Ann Smarty, context surrounding a link is more important from a reputable source rather than the anchor text itself. That's really interesting. I don't know if there's data to support this, but I really do think that there's something to this. So if you are getting a link from someone, if you're controlling the anchor text, there's a good chance that this is a link on a website that Google is just going to ignore. Google is getting really good at figuring out when a link is truly a recommendation for your website and when it's one that you made. But if you can get that link in the midst of a paragraph or a phrase that is talking on the same subjects that you're relevant for, then this is a really, really good thing. There has been some more discussion recently on content behind tabs. We've talked about this a lot, where Google has said that in the age of mobile-first indexing, if you have content that's hidden behind a tab, it really should be treated as the same importance as the rest of the site. Although our tests sort of show that Google doesn't like the content behind tabs. We find that often it's hard to surface that content when we're searching for it. And so Brody Clark has done some tests tests and actually managed to get featured snippets from content that is behind tabs. So if you want more information on this, any of the things I'm talking about here are covered in our newsletter. This is episode 105, and you can find it at mariehaynes.com/newsletter. And so you can read more, and we've linked to a number of things that talk about the stuff I'm talking about here in podcast. A cool tip from Greg Gifford at SearchLove is how to know whether your Google Analytics data is being sampled. Most of you probably know this, but I know it was news to several people in the room. If you have a massive website and you're getting information from Google Analytics, often you'll see that you're not getting 100% of the data exactly like it is, but rather Google samples the data and presents you with, a close estimate. So in the top left corner of most Google Analytics screens, there's a check mark. And for most sites, it's going to be green, which means that your data is not sampled. And if you see that check mark is yellow, then you're actually dealing with sampled data, and it may not be as accurate as usual. Another tip from Greg Gifford that I really, really liked was to look at your About page and ask yourself whether another business could very easily take your About page and use it for theirs. Your goal should be to make it so that your About page screams about how amazing your business is. So if somebody's looking at your About page, maybe they want to just find out more information about your company, but often they're trying to figure out, should I buy from this company or from one of their competitors? And so your About page is the place to really, really brag about your EAT, basically. Greg didn't say that. That's my words. Brag about why people would trust your business more than the others, about how much experience you've had, about why, where you've been featured in the press and things like that. Your About page can really, really say a lot. There's something that Gary Illyes said in his Q&A that we'll cover the Q&A soon in this podcast. But one of the things that he said was that your About page, for large websites at least, is likely used to get information for the knowledge graph. And so if you are trying to populate the knowledge graph with information about your business, your About page is very, very important as well to get that information for your website. Quick little local tip. Again, this was from Greg Gifford. Greg said that you can easily find what secondary categories your competitors are using in Google My Business. Now, it's very important that you make your main category truly your main category because that's the most important category. But if you go to Google Maps, you don't want to do this from organic, but go to maps.google.com or whatever.ca, whatever your TLD is for your country. And then find your competitor and then look at the source code for the Google Maps listing. And you can do a Control F for what your main category is, because the main category is listed on Google Maps. It's very clear for everybody to see. And then you can Control F to find that, and then you'll see a list of other categories that are their subcategories. And you may want to just look at those and see, are those ones that we should consider including as subcategories for us as well? That was a really cool tip, and I want to thank you, Greg, for all of the great stuff that you gave away at SearchLove. It was fantastic. Let's see what else we can do here. Another tip from Greg as well is if you are wanting to rank on Apple Maps, is that even? Yeah, I guess so. That's the thing. Rank on Apple Maps. Then you want to be sure that you're getting reviews on the sites that feed the stars for Apple Maps. And so in the United States, that's generally Yelp. And so you want to be paying attention to that and get reviews on Apple Maps because a lot of people are using them. And so that's a really cool tip. A few more tips from SearchLove. Will Critchlow talked about how Distilled did some split testing with the new rel equals UGC. For those of you who are still confused about that, rel equals UGC is just another way to mark a no followed link as no followed, and you're essentially telling Google that this link is generated from user-generated content, and our belief is that Google knows, all right, well, we're not going to pay any attention to that link because they can't trust user-generated content. And so Distill did some split testing implementing UGC, and there was really no change to the websites in terms of traffic and rankings for those who implemented it. And this is not unexpected. Google has said, and Gary actually said in his Q&A, that there really isn't a benefit to webmasters to implement rel equals UGC or rel equals sponsored. It's more to help Google understand the web. And so I still don't understand why anybody would do it. I know I joke that somebody pointed this out just this week, that I think we were the very first website to receive a rel equals sponsored link. And we have one paid link, and that is on Barry Schwartz's site on Search Engine Roundtable. It sends us good traffic and does convert from time to time. And so we pay Barry to be listed on this website. It's a no-followed link, so it's not like we're paying him to pass PageRank to us. And it's very clearly marked as sponsored. And so why do I keep saying Gary Barry? All these rhyming names. So Barry marked it as rel equals sponsored. And, there's really no benefit to him to do it. As far as I can see, there's no benefit to us. But somehow it helps Google understand that those particular links on that part of his site are sponsored links, and they should not be passing link signals to our website. Let's see. Luke Carthy gave a really, really great talk at SearchLove as well. I really liked how he talked about using Screaming Frog for e-commerce sites. And he gave a great amount of information about looking at your competitors' sites. One of the things he said is that you can use the custom extraction from Screaming Frog to actually look for specific things on your competitors' pages. So he said you can look at their product pages and, for example, only crawl the pages that say 0 results. And so these would be sort of the out-of-stock products on your competitors' pages. And then you can cross-reference those against your own data. So you could look at, do you have those pages, those products, and then pull in data from your products, such as Google Analytics data. So are any of their out-of-stock products actually products that are getting clicks, maybe getting links on your site? And then hey, we should really be pushing this because our major competitor is all out of this product, and maybe we should be trying to sell more of ours. And so I think you can get some really good competitive information from that. He also recommended looking at log files, instead of just Google Analytics, to get this sort of information. So if you're involved in doing SEO for a super competitive e-commerce niche at all, then this is something that I think would really give you a competitive advantage. And I would recommend experimenting more with just crawling your competitors' sites and seeing where can we get an in, where can we take advantage of things that are missing on their site. Another really great talk at SearchLove was from Stacey McNaught. I really liked how she talked about a website that saw some drops with a core update. And what they did was they took information from Google Search Console on keyword rankings. Now, we can have all these discussions as to whether those rankings are accurate or not. The point is, though, she looked to see which keywords were seeing the biggest drops. And for this particular client, she noticed that their informational queries dropped by 64%. They were hit really hard. But their transactional queries only dropped 16%. And this is really interesting. I think part of these core updates, especially if you have an e-commerce site, is Google figuring out when a potential customer really wants to buy something, and then only presenting those sites. So let's say I was, doing some research on a particular product, but I was nowhere near the stage of the funnel where I'm actually getting my credit card out. At this point, I'm just trying to decide, is X better than Y? And so in that case, if Google can figure out that my searches are more informational than transactional, then I'm less likely to see a transactional site or an e-commerce site. If Google can figure out that, oh, okay, she is really ready to buy, if I do this where to buy product X, then I'm more likely to see rankings, sites ranking that actually sell products. So for this particular client, what Stacy says that they did was they had a piece of content that used to convert really well. It was a product page, and it used to rank in the top 3. For their main queries. And so what they realized was that these queries were now being won by sites that were completely informational in nature. They didn't sell any products. And so what they did was they made a massive guide to buying this product and made that their main page for the products. They did include calls to action, although from what it sounds like, they were greatly toned down so that a user who's looking at the page would not feel like, oh, I'm being, constantly told to buy this product, but rather I could get good information from it. And the cool thing is, she said they did no promotion of this page. They did no link building for this page. Within 2 months, they were top 3 again. And but she did say that it didn't convert as well as before. So I don't know if they came out net positive at the end of that maybe they got more traffic, and even though they had a lower percentage of conversions, a lower percentage of a smaller number is better than a higher percentage of 0. So something to consider. And we're gonna those of you who are waiting for my white paper I'm writing on medical consensus, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. We're looking at that too, at transactional information and how to tone down calls to action. So perhaps Google is more likely to trust a website that's actually selling products as well. I want to spend, and I know we're kind of longer than usual here, but I want to spend some time on Gary Illyes Q&A from Pubcon, because this, like I said before, was one of the best Q&As that I've seen. And Gary did a great job of giving us some information that I thought was very helpful without being overly sarcastic and just making fun of webmasters. It was fantastic to see Gary actually giving us helpful stuff. And I have to say that Jennifer Slegg, who did the questions for Q&A, did an absolutely amazing job at not only coming up with really good questions, but also keeping Gary on track so that he could answer as many questions as possible. We wrote an entire blog post on this. Again, if you go to our blog at mariehaines.com/blog, or just do a Google search for Q&A with Gary Illyes, it's Illyes, then you can find this blog post. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on most of these things that he talked about. Let's see here. He said about the Penguin algorithm that it mostly runs on autopilot now. He did say maybe there had been some minor updates, but for the most part, Penguin just does what it's supposed to do. Now, that does not mean that Google is not updating link algorithms. And something that we've come to believe over the last year plus is that there are many other algorithms that use links or that look at link quality. And this is our opinion. I don't have 100% evidence for this, but there are many other algorithms other than Penguin. So Penguin, in my opinion, is the algorithm that figures out, oh, these are just spammy links. Let's not even look at them. Let's not count them as good links or bad links. Let's not pass signals through them. Let's just ignore these. And I think one of the main reasons why a lot of people are not seeing benefits from using the disavow tool is that you're disavowing links that the Penguin algorithm is just ignoring. There's no harm in disavowing ultra spammy links, provided they truly are ultra spammy, but you're not likely to see an uplift from disavowing just ultra spammy links. And I've been preaching about this a lot lately, but we've been seeing really, really nice improvements in sites where we've been cutthroat in disavowing links that were specifically made made for SEO reasons. And one of the types of links that we're seeing good benefit from this, from disavowing, is links that are within articles. I'm not saying every link that you get in an article should be disavowed, but many of you are doing widespread link building via article posting in articles that very few people are ever going to read or click on your link. And so we've been disavowing some of these links and seeing massive gains in traffic. And if you've been listening to me for a while, I don't say that often. I usually qualify things with, well, it could be something else. These are sites that we really, really feel strongly that disavowing these links that were made for SEO purposes are helping these sites see big, big gains. And these are sites, they're not massive, giant authorities. Like, there are sites that I wish I could share more information with you. So I've sort of strayed a bit here from the Q&A, but the point is, Penguin, that determines whether links are spammy, probably, is running mostly on autopilot. But Gary did say that they have other algorithms that are continually being updated. He was talking about core algorithms. We think that August 19th to the 22nd or so, Google released some type of link-related update, not Penguin, but a link algorithm that got better at determining whether a site was making links for the purpose of SEO. So if you're seeing drops in traffic between August 19th and August 22nd, and you have been involved in heavy link building, then this is something you should be paying attention to. And so this leads into the next question that Gary was asked, and that's, should sites investigate in link audits? His answer was, and I quote here, if you know you had a shady SEO company or you were buying links, it's probably best to do. He also said, though, that randomly disavowing spam links is not likely to improve your rankings. So this goes in line with what I just said. And I would take the words shady SEO company out there because there are some really good SEO companies, or at least decent ones, that I have heard their names many times. They're respected as authorities that are still building links in ways that go against Google's guidelines. And so just because you don't necessarily have to hire some low-cost overseas link building company in order to have unnatural links. He was also asked about whether it's possible to hurt yourself with Google's disavow tool. And his answer was, it happens often enough that people hurt themselves with the tool, that if it were me, I'd remove the disavow tool. If you don't know what you're doing, you can shoot yourself in the foot. So this shows us that the disavow tool can be pretty powerful. And again, we've seen some improvements. I've heard stories of sites hurting themselves. I only have a couple of examples. We've filed probably hundreds of disavows. And one site that saw drops was one that had disavowed their entire link profile. Another site, we did have one manual action site that I can recall that we were very, very aggressive with their disavow and did see some slight drops after disavowing. But pretty much every other case that we've done, we've either seen an improvement or maybe no change. So I don't want to discourage people from disavowing, provided you know what you're doing, but do not be using some automated tool to tell you which links to disavow. You absolutely must be looking at saying, look, using your brain in saying, is this a link that was made just for SEO reasons? Would the web spam team consider this an unnatural link, a link that we made in order to game Google's system? And if that's the case, then those are the links that you need to be disavowing. Do we need to worry about links that do not show up in Search Console when it comes to auditing links? This has come up for many years now, and Google has always said that the links in Search Console are essentially all you need to get out of a manual action. We heard a great talk by Jim Boykin at Pubcon where he was talking about using just the links in Search Console, and they have had many cases where they've gotten out of a manual action just by using those links. Historically at MHC, whenever we do any sort of link audit, we always want to look at one link from every single linking domain that we can find. And one of my main reasons for doing this is because when Google gives us example links, they will often give us example links that are from that are not in Search Console. So Search Console gives us the sample of what they think are the most relevant links in your case, but they're not going to see every single link, and they're not going to include, for most sites, every single link that is in their link graph. And so this concerns me. So I do think that you can get a manual action lifted by just looking at Search Console links, but I'm not sure that I want to do that all the time because these other links that perhaps were not in Search Console are potentially still used in Google's algorithms that look at link quality. So we're going to start experimenting with this for sites that are massive. We have some sites that come to us where the cost to actually do a link audit manually is, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's pretty rare that anybody wants to do that. And so we're going to experiment with using just the Google Search Console links and perhaps doing ongoing, maybe monthly checks of Google Search Console to see which new links pop up for us to also consider disavowing as well. Let's see, but I still do recommend wherever possible that you use multiple sources. I'm not out here to, make more money for Ahrefs and Majestic and Moz. It makes sense for us to have a subscription to each of those. For the average webmaster, though, who doesn't want to shell out hundreds of dollars each month for link tools, you may be fine to just look at Search Console links. Let's talk about EAT and Gary's answers on EAT. Number one, this got written about by Barry Schwartz. There is no EAT score. This does not mean that Google does not use EAT. On the contrary, Gary gave some really good information on EAT, which we'll get to in a minute. But there's no one specific score. And I know we had postulated at some point that perhaps there was a specific score for trust, and that, if trust fell below a certain threshold, that you would have difficulty ranking. I think that's still a possibility, but there's no one score for EAT. What Gary said is that EAT and YMYL, so your money or your life, are concepts that allow humans to dumb down algorithms. He says Google has a collection of millions of tiny algorithms that work in unison to spit out a ranking score. Many of those baby algorithms look for signals in pages or content. When you put them together in certain ways, they can be conceptualized as YMYL. It's not like we have a YMYL score, though. And then he went on to say again that multiple algorithms at Google conceptualize EAT. And I think this has been a little bit of a bone of contention amongst some of the well-known SEOs that are, speaking and writing articles. There are people who disagree with me on, or they think they disagree with me on EAT. I had a conversation with somebody at Pubcon who said, I think we disagree on EAT. And when we talked about it, we didn't. We were just presenting things in different ways. So we have never really, as far as I know, said that there's a score for EAT. But EAT, it basically encompasses everything that Google wants to look for to determine, is this the best site for us to rank for a YMYL query? Is this a site that is written, the content is produced by somebody who has expertise in this area? Are they known as authorities in this area? Are there any things on this website that cause us not to trust it? These are all components of EAT, of course, and Google has said many times now that this is very, very important. A couple of my talks at Pubcon were just giving, piece after piece of evidence in Google documents that talk about the concept of EAT and how important it is. Let's talk about authors. This was another little controversial point. Does Google recognize authors on sites? So we've been saying for a couple of years now that it's very important to have an author bio on all of your posts, unless you're a giant authority, like if you're WebMD and you write something on a medical topic, you may not need to say this is written by Dr. So-and-so. But for for most of us listening to this podcast, you really should be having author bios. Now, Gary Illyes was asked whether Google recognizes authors on sites, and he said they probably do for Google Scholar and maybe even Google News, which is interesting, but they're not likely. He actually didn't go on the but. After this is just my thoughts. He kind of said, well, we probably do for these, and then he went and talked about entities. I think it's unlikely that Google has, I don't even know if this is unlikely. It's possible that Google has, the knowledge graph is big enough from what they can see, based not what we can see on knowledge graph search using their API. They may have each of us mapped out as entities that we just don't know about. And I know this is getting kind of complicated, but my point is if one of my team writes an article for my website and we say this article was written by so-and-so, and they write, for other websites, I think Google can gather entity information, even though that person is not, at this point, a well-known authority in SEO. They probably can gather information about that author and whatnot. But we don't know for sure whether Google's doing that. So something that Danny Sullivan said recently, and I don't have the exact quote, is that Google wants to understand whether content is expert written. And I think they could use natural language processing to determine, this medical content is written using terms that doctors understand. And it doesn't necessarily have to be so complicated that humans don't, humans, like doctors aren't humans, that non-doctors would understand. But I think they could probably determine whether the content is accurate. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit about how Google does that in just a minute. So, should we still have author bios? Whether or not Google is looking at who your authors are, you absolutely should have author bios. Author bios, John Mueller has said, are a good way to determine trust or to establish trust from users. If I'm reading your content and I see, this content is written by so-and-so who's been in this industry for 10 years and she's seen all sorts of problems that I would be dealing with, and she's won awards in this area, that's something you want your readers to find. You want your readers to trust your content. Is Google specifically looking at, your content is written by so-and-so is not known as an expert in this area? I don't know. It's hard to say. But we should still be using author bios. Gary gave a really, really interesting talk or discussion about how he uses the quality raters. This is really cool. So Gary, I actually didn't know, I don't think that Gary writes code. And so Gary writes a lot of the code that goes into some of Google's algorithms. And when he has some code that he wants to implement into the algorithms, he said that what he does is he presents the quality raters with two different sets of queries. And potentially query results. And so basically what they're looking at is, here, if we did this search, here's what the current algorithm would return to a user. And here's what the new algorithm with Gary's code implemented would return to a user. And when that happens, then the quality raters are told to assess which results are better. And they base their results not on their own personal beliefs and things like that, but based on the information that's in the quality raters guidelines. And so it doesn't necessarily go to every single quality rater. It goes to a statistically significant sample of quality raters. And if he gets information back that's the majority of the quality raters say, yeah, the results are better with your new code in it, and then they weigh that against the cost of doing this. I was reading about an experiment where they showed the quality raters whether adding certain images in the SERPs made the SERPs better, and they had to weigh that against the cost of increased page load time. So if Gary gets the results back that say, yeah, the results are better with your code in it, and it makes sense to do that, then that will go live into the algorithm, or it may go through some live testing as well, too, before it goes into the algorithm. So that was an interesting look into how Gary uses the quality raters for Google. Does Google look for a site's about page or contact page? I think I talked about this earlier. Gary said they're likely used by the knowledge graph, especially for larger entities. Let's see. We've been going for a long time here, but we're almost done. And I want to keep going because this was just such great information. I don't want to put it off to next week. Does crawling increase prior to an update? Gary gave the SEO answer that says it depends. He says we have millions of baby algorithms and they might trigger something that increases crawl rate on certain sites, but it's not a blanket thing. We've had people in the past that have said, I remember when Panda was going rampant, and I believe Alan Blayweiss posted some stuff showing that a good number of his clients saw increased crawling before they were either hit or benefited from Panda. And we didn't see the same thing in sites that we looked at. And it's not to say that Alan was wrong or that we were wrong. It just may be that Google was looking for certain things. So if all of a sudden you see a spike in crawling from Google, it may be that your site is getting assessed in terms of quality. It could just be something else. I think it's too variable for us to put too much stock in that. This was a really interesting question. Does Google use consensus for things like baby oils cures cancer? So we have been talking a lot about this idea of scientific consensus and whether Google measures that in websites. And I have a whole blog post that I've written on, our thoughts on how Google could do that. And it really doesn't matter how they do it. The question is whether they do it. And so Gary said he actually doesn't want to give us too much information in this area. I actually had a private conversation with Gary after his Q&A where I was asking him about particular alternative medicine clients that were having trouble ranking, even though parts of their site were really, really good. And then other parts of their site were talking about alternative theories that maybe aren't in line with consensus. And Gary shared with me that one of the reasons he doesn't want to give too much information in this area is because he doesn't want to help websites that are potentially providing people with false information. He shared with me that he has a family member that passed away from cancer and that there was so much bad advice online when they were looking for information on this cancer. And so Google really, I believe, has a strong mandate to make it so that sites that talk about alternative treatments that aren't thoroughly recognized by mainstream doctors as true are going to have trouble ranking, especially in the area of medicine. I think this will eventually translate to other areas as well. But here's what Gary said in the public Q&A. He said, some of our he says, this is an area where I specifically don't want to give too much information. Some of our algorithms use entities. Entities translate to terms. Certain algos can use medical terms. Anything from Project Owl. I'll just say here, Project Owl is a couple of years ago, actually probably more than that now, it was Google's initiative to start fighting fake news on the web. So he said anything from Project Owl can rely on that. For me, medical terms are close to my heart. Those who provide medical information and they are highly authoritative, they know how to do it. And he said something after that was mumbled, and unfortunately I didn't catch it. Gosh, what do we say here? The question is, how does Google determine whether your content is accurate or not? Let's actually move to that. Is content accuracy a ranking factor? Because this ties into this medical consensus thing. If you are writing that baby oil cures cancer and, the vast majority of the medical community is not on board with you, then is that, are you actually writing accurate information? So when Gary was asked if content accuracy is a ranking factor, he said for YMYL sites, yes. He says, we go to great lengths to surface reputable and trustworthy sources. So yes. And so this brought up a bunch of debate online because Danny Sullivan had just recently tweeted that Google can't measure the accuracy of content. And then Danny was, asked, I think Barry Schwartz wrote about this, and Danny came back and said, he says, no, we can't tell if content is accurate. But again, signals, we look for things that we believe correspond to accuracy. In that regard, damn right, having accurate content is a ranking factor. So we've just had two Google employees tell us that yes, having accurate content is a ranking factor. And Danny's next tweets said, well, if you want us to give you some guidelines on what it is that you can do to show that your content is accurate. And then he said, maybe we should give it a name like EAT. And so this is all connected to EAT. Again, I don't think Google, it's Google's job to determine whether your content is truly 100% accurate. I had a conversation on Twitter with somebody just this morning who was saying, well, if Google was around in the time of Galileo, then Google would have buried all of Galileo's thinking, and that's not right. Well, how is Google to know that Galileo his theories were going to end up being proven right? They know that when the experts of the day start agreeing with him. And that's, I think, what is happening now. So, I could talk for another couple of hours about content accuracy, and I don't think that I want to go into that because we're almost at an hour at this point now anyhow. But I think the take-home point here is that we've had two Google employees say that, yes, having accurate content is a ranking factor. One of the things we're working on now is how to go through your content and determine what potentially could be seen as inaccurate by Google and how we could change that so that Google no longer thinks that we have inaccurate content. I think this is key for sites that have been hit with core updates recently. Is having too many ads a ranking factor? Gary said, I will go with yes, the page layout algorithm is still alive and working. I think we're going to end it there. I was going to do some Q&A from podcast, and I'm going to leave those, put them in the next episode, just as we are quite a bit longer than we usually are. I want to thank you to all of you who actually reached out to me to say, where's your podcast? I haven't heard it for the last couple of weeks, and I apologize that I haven't been able to do it. Normally when I'm on the road, I actually do a podcast episode. I think in the last 2 weeks, I gave 6 different talks, which all involved extensive prep. And so for the next little bit, you're probably not going to see me on the speaker circuit, at least till March, I think, is my next talk. I'm going to be focusing on actually analyzing what we think Google is doing, helping our own clients as well, and of course, playing Fortnite. I won 2 solo games this week, which was a big thing for me. If you're thinking about playing Fortnite, now's the time to get into it because they've really, really implemented this skill-based matchmaking, so you're not completely out of your depth when you're playing, but my username is mwahahaha. I can't remember how many A's are in it, but if you get killed by somebody just with that name, just know I'm actually at home going mwahahaha. My kids and I we have competitions to see who can do the best maniacal laugh, and I usually win, but hey, it doesn't matter. Okay, I'll stop now because obviously I'm very tired after doing this full episode. Thank you again for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again next week and wish you the best of luck with your rankings.